As the Derek Chauvin trial gets underway in Minneapolis, there are interesting questions about who will be considering his guilt or innocence. Like, how the hell did they find a guy who hasn't seen the George Floyd video by now? That's not a requirement to be seated on the jury, but one of those seated claims he actually has not. And there are interesting questions about what this jury will be considering Chauvin guilty or innocent of. Because now a third-degree murder charge against Chauvin has been reinstated after AG Keith Ellison's original shotgun spread of charges last spring. So this charge, in combination with second-degree murder and manslaughter charges, will have jurors considering multiple possible theories of Chauvin's guilt. The theory on the second-degree murder charge is that Chauvin unintentionally killed Floyd while committing a felony assault. The theory on the second-degree manslaughter charge is that Chauvin caused Floyd's death by culpable negligence, and the theory on the third-degree murder charge is that Chauvin killed Floyd by engaging in reckless behavior eminently dangerous to others without regard for human life. It's going to be tough to argue that Chauvin was reckless or negligent beyond reasonable doubt when the alleged recklessness or negligence is part of the Minneapolis PD training manual, ironically, to avoid cardiac arrest and potential asphyxia. It's going to be tough to argue Chauvin was reckless or negligent beyond reasonable doubt when George Floyd was begging to get on the ground in violent refusal to sit in the squad car.
I'm on the ground. I'm on the ground. I'm on the ground. I'm going down. I'm going down. I'm going down. Get me in the squad.
And even if there was recklessness or negligence on Chauvin's part, it's going to be tough to argue it was more consequential than the recklessness of George Floyd himself. The recklessness of slamming a fentanyl, methamphetamine, marijuana cocktail or two. The recklessness of violently resisting police for several minutes. And of course, the ultimate recklessness, shopping without a mask, despite being corona positive. I've heard several times this year that is an offense deserving of a death sentence.
You're so ridiculous. I hope you both die a long, painful death.
I hope they all get it and die. I'm sorry.
Now, to be perfectly accurate, the state doesn't have to prove that Chauvin's recklessness was the definitive factor in causing Floyd's death, just that it was a contributing factor in the death. But even that will be difficult to demonstrate, given no actual physical injuries related to asphyxia or strangulation were found in Floyd's autopsy. But of course, in considering all of these facts, we're actually burying the lead. The reason people are paying attention to this trial is not for the particulars of the law or even what actually happened. It's the anticipation for what sort of riot show we're about to see. The sequel rarely lives up to the original, but this scenario has the potential. And the city has fortified the courthouse area like they expect Little Mogadishu to finally become the real thing. And quietly, the descent into lawlessness is already well underway. It sounds like it never really stopped throughout the last year, actually. There have only been brief intermissions between episodes of increased violence throughout the city, but in particular, ironically, on the site of George Floyd's death. It's become a makeshift memorial at 38th and Chicago and the surrounding area in South Minneapolis. Protesters originally set up traffic blockades with whatever random junk they had, but the city later formalized the area's traffic closure with concrete barriers. And you know how this goes. Stop me if you've heard this one before. A chunk of the city is barricaded off. Left-wing protesters and agitators occupy the area. Shady criminal activity goes down, and no matter what, you better not dare to even try to report on it.
This area behind me is the George Floyd Memorial. This is where George Floyd was killed. These barricades have been set up by protesters and supporters of the movement. They don't allow anyone in, not even the police. It's called an autonomous zone.
You're in a bad situation here in a second.
Oh, I thought if we were on this side of the barricade.
No, you're going to be in a bad situation in a second.
What do you mean by
Because
bad
you've been called out
situation?
for what you are and you need to get out of here.
Please go.
Even on
We
this
know,
side of the
we know
barricade.
what you are. You need to get in your car and go.
We're just media.
I don't give a who you are.
Go ahead
You've been
and go.
called out for who you are. You need to get in your car and go.
You heard the claim there, the occupiers don't allow the police in. It's sort of unclear what that means or how they could even have that authority. Activist signage in the area has declared an autonomous zone in Seattle or Portland style, but activists also blame police for obstructing emergency services from entry and exit. So it may be the case that police are blocked from entry, or it may just be that police have written it off, or maybe both. A city councilwoman says that given the resistance, police just avoid the area altogether. Whatever's going on, it isn't just this reporter saying that the mob doesn't allow the police in. That characterization was repeated by a local Black Lives Matter activist as well.
It was made clear law enforcement was not welcome to penetrate that zone.
Kim Griffin supports police reform and was outside the courthouse protesting Floyd's death, but she does not agree with what's happening at the memorial.
People that want to go and support doesn't feel a sense of inclusion. There is more of a militant type atmosphere over there and a sense of fear.
Well, hey, good for her. She stands on principle. We may disagree about George Floyd, but as long as we agree about the rule of law, we can still get along and we can live together.
Her nephew, 28-year-old Emez Wright, was shot and killed there over the weekend.
Or that too, that would also be a reason to disagree with the conduct at the memorial. My God, that escalated quickly. Speaking of burying the lead, how about this reporting? She agrees with the cause, but she has concerns that the autonomous zone is becoming hostile and dangerous. In particular, it didn't feel very inclusive when they killed her family. That's right, last weekend, a guy was gunned down in what sounds like cold-blooded murder amid the lawlessness surrounding the George Floyd body outline. You don't and won't hear anything about this one because the only Black lives that matter to Black Lives Matter are the ones that push the politics. This is 30-year-old Emez Wright. There are now 2 arrests in the case, though police are providing no further details. And it is alleged that these autonomous zone occupiers blocked police and emergency responders from providing immediate assistance.
Were police able to get in and help him?
Police were not allowed to get into that area. He was carried outside the zone of George Floyd Square, which is an atrocity because his life was taken, and who knows whether or not he would have survived had things been different.
The local paper says it was some sort of argument gone wrong. Wright and the suspect were having a discussion. The suspect shot him and fled in a Suburban. A Slate reporter at the scene described hearing something like 15 shots. The scene became blood-stained, and a witness described seeing guts. People fled the area using what the reporter described as, quote, muscle memory. As in, the crime is so rampant that running away from gunshots is routine. It's just like riding a bike. You learn how, and then you never really forget. And there's no time to forget in the George Floyd Autonomous Zone anyway. They're getting plenty of practice. In 2019, there were 3 shootings in the area. In 2020, there were 19, a 600% increase. But those numbers might be a little misleading, says one resident. Those aren't all shootings necessarily. Some of those are just people shooting their guns into the air, to celebrate how safe things are now that they've chased the cops away. And if you didn't hear about that fatal shooting at the George Floyd Memorial, you definitely didn't hear about this one either. Even today, I can hardly find any information about it. According to social media posts, Damian Chambers, also known as Murphy Ranks, was shot dead in cold blood on June 19th at the George Floyd Memorial, trying to de-escalate a fight. There is very little factual information available from investigators or news sources, but the investigation of his death is one of 24 demands that autonomous zone occupiers have for the city. So first you guys chase away the police, and then you demand that the police come back to investigate the killings that happened in their absence. Seems like it might be more efficient just to keep the police around all the time. Even though the circumstances of these 2 shooting deaths are still murky, it is clear that the lawless activity after George Floyd has claimed at least twice as many Black lives as the original incident that spawned the lawlessness in the first place. And that's just in the area immediately surrounding, because don't forget, last year's multi-$100 million rioting spree also charred another Black life nearly beyond recognition in a pawn shop fire. Every single one of these cases is plainly and factually more murderous than what happened between Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, but you'll never remember these names. You'll forget them tomorrow. The narrative peddling news will never mention them, and we'll keep buying and selling the lie that it's the police that are an existential threat to Black life. The reason we all know the name George Floyd, and we all already forgot and will never remember the names Emez Wright, Damian Chambers, Oscar Stewart, is not race. The difference between them, and the reason their lives are publicly valued or not, is not the color of their skin. The only difference between them is who is purportedly responsible for these deaths, police or street thugs. The only thing that decides whether we hear their names ritualistically repeated on the news and see their faces painted poorly in terrible street murals, or if we never even hear about them at all, is whether we can blame police for it. That's it. And that'll tell you everything you need to know about this movement. It's not about which lives do or should matter. It is only about who we can target and destroy with that claim. And speaking of destroying Target, I wouldn't waste your money buying anything there in the Twin Cities Metro in the coming weeks and months. I hear they're planning another big doorbuster 100% off sale very soon. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Parler. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.